the honor in this moment to, I'm going to sort of pass a baton to a fellow board member, Dave Davies. So delighted to introduce him. He's a pretty new member of the board of Thank You Life, and he comes with vast experience in the sort of business consulting world, has been COO of a company called Force Management for many years. And this company consults and trains sales organizations to increase profitability through better messaging and marketing. And that's how we actually met. They offered a free seminar to Thank You Life to help us with some of these things. And there was an immediate resonance. And Dave also was a U.S. Army captain in the 82nd Airborne Division, which is amazing. And also he was a West Point graduate. And most of all, he's just an incredible human that I'm so grateful to work with. He happens to also be a mushroom enthusiast, which is why he's going to be here today introducing our special guest and moderating our conversation. So Dave, you take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. It's my privilege to moderate tonight. For those of you who have been on these fireside chats before, we're going to do things a little bit differently tonight. So Eugenia has written a book. It's called Have a Good Trip. And hopefully some of you got an opportunity to pick it up. It's an awesome book. Very informative, easy read. It's written in a folksy, down-to-earth style, and it has a lot of different balanced insights associated with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some different passages throughout the book, then have Eugenia expand on some of the concepts, and we're going to take a poll somewhere along the line. We're going to have a breakout group to get some interaction going. And Eugenia is awesome. Got to spend some time with her in preparation for this. And just a really wonderful person. She's an author and thought leadership in many things. Mycology, which is what we'll be talking about tonight, food science, psychedelics. She's appeared in numerous publications to include the New York Times, Scientific American, and the Wall Street Journal. But tonight we're going to be focusing in on the book. So welcome, Eugenia, and thank you for the gift of your time tonight.
Thanks, Dave.
It's great to have you.
Glad to be here.
My first question to get it going is, how and why did you first get involved in psychedelic mushrooms or just mushrooms in general?
So I got into psychedelic mushrooms through mushrooms in general. And my interest in mushrooms grew out of my early career as a food writer. My passion was foraged foods, hunting, fishing. That's what I like to write about. And I wrote many, many stories on the subject. I became increasingly interested in mushrooms, but I sort of moved away from being interested in things that flee and more interested in things that just hid. And so in order to find mushrooms, I had to learn a little bit of mycology. I had to figure out why they grew where they grew. Sorry about that clicking. I live in a loft in Manhattan and the heat's coming on. It won't last long. It's in learning a little mycology, which I achieved by joining my local mycological society, the New York Mycological Society. There are mycological societies all over the country, in every state. If you go to the North American Mycological Association website, NAMA.org, you can easily find a club in your state, or multiple clubs even, depending on how many mushrooms are growing there, how good the habitat is for mushrooms. Anyway, I started to travel around the country and learn about mushrooms from at all these different forays that different clubs did. And my knowledge really grew significantly over that time, and as well as I was hunting a lot of mushrooms in other places, which was great because if you travel to hunt mushrooms, people will show you their secret spots because they think you're not going to come back, which I didn't. But it was great. I had great access to all kinds of wonderful things, including hunting magic mushrooms. And so I eventually put my what I knew about hunting mushrooms in the United States and basic mycology into a book called Mycophilia. In the process of writing Mycophilia, I became very interested. I started going to the Telluride Mushroom Festival, which was the only festival that mushroom foray, that did any that covered magic mushrooms at all. I mean, in most of the other forays around the in the USA, it was like magic mushrooms were the black sheep of mycology. Nobody ever talked about them. But at the Telluride Festival, they did. And it was through Telluride that I started to learn about this new burgeoning science that was happening. So on the periphery, really, of the scientific world, like coming out of Johns Hopkins and so on. And so in Mycophilia, I reported on that. And then I continued to stay involved in what was happening and periodically reporting it in my various outlets as the new science evolved and as I learned more about different aspects of the psychedelic culture as it relates to mushrooms. And that led me to writing this book, which is not a book of advocacy. It doesn't tell you what you should do, but it does seek to answer any questions the reader might have about magic mushrooms and their use.
Very cool. So, magic mushrooms in the wild is the cow patty theory. Is that actually correct? That's where they tend to hover.
Well, there's actually lots of species of psychedelic psilocybin. When we talk about magic mushrooms, we're really talking about psilocybin species. Those are the most commonly consumed. And the one you're referring to is psilocybin cubensis, which is the most commonly cultivated. And it is I believe it's called a coprophyte. So they eat poop and they grow on herbivore poop of all sorts in different places. But there are many others. All of the psilocybe, however, are saprobes, meaning they decompose stuff. They're actually secondary decomposers. So they decompose stuff that's already sort of on its way out. So wood chips and semi-decomposed grasses and dead grasses, and of course manure, which is plant matter that is partially decomposed. Um, there are other magic mushrooms. I don't write about them in this book, although I researched them, and I do have a Substack that's free that I write, where I included some material on Amanita muscaria, which is a psychedelic mushroom, but that also, is a more complicated mushroom to use in a lot of ways. And I didn't include it in the book simply because I couldn't write about everything. My
Right.
publishers were like, no, too much. Um, but yes, the most common psychedelic mushroom is psilocybin cubensis, and it does grow on poop. Like you can pick
Awesome.
them in Texas.
Got it. Got it. Good to
Good
clear
job.
that up. It's something I always wondered about. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick poll. And what we want to do is Ronnie's going to fire this thing up. If you could take a moment to answer it, related to everybody's experience or lack of experience with magic mushrooms. So just take a minute, answer it, then we'll publish the results.
We're about halfway there.
Yep. Just click everything that applies and submit, and we'll see where we end up.
I think 3 more people. Okay, well, I think we might end it right there. We had
All right.
almost everybody filled out.
All
Now,
right.
Dave, you can't see it, can you? The results?
Now,
Okay.
what's it looking like?
All right,
Oh, there we
share.
go. Oh, we can see it.
Great.
Personal growth, spiritual problem solving, philosophical entertainment.
Eugenia, how's this compare to what you normally encounter?
Well, I'd say that this cohort, our audience here, um, don't represent what I usually encounter, which is lots of people who are doing them for purposes of recreation or entertainment. And rather that the majority of folks are using them for personal growth, emotional healing, mystical experiences, um, which kind of suggests to me, I want to guess that our demographic is maybe a little more mature than like all the folks on Reddit. Not all the folks, but a lot of the maybe social news sites, um, which is, interesting in itself. It's funny how it ends up maybe telling you something about our cohort here.
Yep, so 85% are yes, I tried for one or more reasons. Is that a high number or an average number or a low number compared to what you typically encounter?
Well, it depends on where you do, like in a forum like this, it's pretty typical. In my Colorado town grocery store, it would be pretty high, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I'm sure
So
it's like the Telluride Mushroom Festival where we'd be
it
pegging
would be relative. Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
over
Pretty close.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just a matter of, who folks are, you know, who are drawn to this kind of conversation.
So now I'm going to go to the book. For those of you that have the book, I'm on page 8, and let me read a passage real fast, and then we'll have Eugenia explain what's behind it. What you can know and what you realize you can't know about psilocybin and its effects are a measure of the degree of confidence you can have in the experience overall. Ultimately, that's determined by dose plus intention minus risk. Dose plus intention minus risk. Could you tell us what that equation is all about, Eugenia?
Yeah. So often, I've been in talking to folks and also in pursuit of my own experiences, I've just wanted to try to um, plan accurately. I just wanted to know how things were going to work out. It can be very spooky to not have a good idea. And so I started to think about, okay, what are the factors that go into whatever does happen in the course of a trip? And so dose plus intention are linked because if someone's intention is to have a good time at a music festival, then they don't want to take a dose that's so high that they can't participate, but are instead sitting in their tent crying for 5 hours. So getting an idea of first starting with your intention, like what am I going for? Why am I taking this drug? And then and then uh and then choosing a dose that ideally would meet that intention. And of course, it's like very hard to say exactly what that is since dosage is extremely subjective. But within certain there's sort of wide parameters as to dose, and we can talk about that. Like what's a microdose, what's a like museum dose, which would be good in music festival, what's a clinical dose, what's typically given in clinical trials, and so on. um, so those two factors determine, kind of what you do minus risk. So the idea is if you however however you mitigate risk, however much risk you remove from the situation, which is based on your dose, which is based on your intention, is going to create the trip that you have. So let me give you an example. If somebody wants to have a good time at a music festival and figures that they could manage, however they figure that out, but they figure that they can manage 1.5 grams of moderate level, a moderate potency psychedelic mushroom. Um, and so that's like the dose. The intention is to be able to enjoy themselves without like freaking out. The risk that they'd have to mitigate would be something like They're with people who, one of which is maybe sober or, is less high than the concert goer. They don't have to drive home in 2 hours. They have a safe place to hole up if they, if they get upset for some reason. They don't have the flu when they're tripping. So there's all these things. And I talk about a lot of those kinds of things that can mitigate risk. Um, but the more factors that someone brings in that mitigates risk, that deletes risk from their potential experience, then that is going to be the experience they get. So dose is a function of intention. Take away as much risk that that size dose would imply, and the result is the trip that you get.
Got it. So that's like a corollary to set and setting, which you typically hear.
Set and setting are definitely players in the risk, in the risk aspect of that equation, because if the higher the dose, the more secure a setting somebody's going to need. Set is always an issue. If someone goes into a psilocybin, there's some good research suggesting that folks that go into a psilocybin trip with psychiatric issues of different sorts run a higher risk of having a bad experience or a scary experience. That doesn't mean that they won't recover from it or they might not get something out of it, but the one's mindset, like where you're at, can be effective, can matter. That can include your state of mind, which is problematic because a lot of people take, as our poll showed, a lot of people will take psychedelics in order to try to heal these conditions, but they are, according to some science, at higher risk of having a difficult time of it. The other kinds of things, like why I mentioned the flu, is that's set as well. That's mindset. I have interviewed people who said, that they had terrible flus and they took psilocybin because they thought they'd get better, that they thought they'd feel better, and instead they had like spun into these, they just felt shittier and shittier. So that was a mistake. The set can also be a reflection of, what's going on, what kind of personal stuff is going on, turmoils of various sorts, like are you in the midst of a grueling divorce or, stuff like that. Maybe it's, maybe those things maybe it would be helpful to consider those things before embarking on, say, a large trip. Additionally, setting, as you mentioned, Dave, is important because if you folks that feel, when folks first take psilocybin, they can feel this onset of anxiety. That can really be exacerbated if the setting feels creepy or insecure or scary, or if people start having doubts like, how am I going to get home? Who is this person that's watching over me? Is it a creep? Are they going to try to feel me up? There's a million things. And so the better situated someone is in terms of their setting, the better situated they are in terms of their security and feelings of safety, the better.
Yeah, it makes sense. Never take mushrooms when you're having a fever dream. That's a good, important safety tip to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So
Don't think when you have the flu. Yeah.
right.
Like kind of common sense, but
Yeah.
people, they do all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah, they figure the cause could be the cure.
yeah.
Hey, feel free, by the way, to come off mute. Does anybody have any questions for Eugenia around that equation? Feel free to, don't be shy, come off mute whenever you want. No? Okay. So further on in the book, I'm on page 32. Psychedelic trips are entirely subjective and dose dependent. So it's impossible to say definitively that X will happen and Y won't. but I can share with you the range of effects people have reported experiencing from onset to peaking to coming down, and where it applies, what it was like for me. So the anatomy of the trip, Eugenia.
Yeah. So, I mean, many of our audience members are maybe gonna feel like they've heard this or experienced it, but with after consuming the mushrooms, it takes a certain amount of time for them to cross the blood-brain barrier. You know, you have to metabolize the mushroom, kind of your stomach acids break the molecule, the psilocybin molecule, and the smaller fragment called psilocin is one that can cross the blood-brain barrier, it travels in your bloodstream, crosses the blood-brain barrier, docks into serotonin receptors, and then the tripping experience starts. There's all kinds of little onset things that people talk about, fast heartbeats. They can feel those first feelings of anxiety as their sort of ego kind of separates from themselves and they feel their mind sort of wandering free of their control. People who really hold tight to their self-control will sometimes struggle with anxiety early on. There can be, I'm trying to remember myself, there can be some like shakes and things like that that can happen, energy shakes sort of. But then once the drug is active in your brain, a variety of effects can happen depending on on you and also on how much the user is consumed. And those can be a variety of they're not really hallucinations. It's not like people see things that aren't there. It's not like they're gonna necessarily mistake a plastic bag for their cat. It's more like uh visual distortions, you know, melting walls, sounds may be very much louder. You know, you can isolate sounds, like pay attention to a particular sound and hear that more intensely. There are a variety of things that people see, like fractals, where their sight breaks into geometric patterns. Folks will feel, then they'll have emotional experiences too. It's not uncommon for folks to feel um, uh, to have insights into their behavior, the behaviors of others, people they love, for example, revelations about one's own behavior um, and the behaviors of people they love. Those can be very illuminating. For some people I know, um, older people in particular who are at a kind of crossroads in their life will do a psilocybin trip in order to um, determine help them decide their path or just have more clarity as to which, you know, path they should take going forward. I always feel like that, at least for myself, and when I've talked to some of these folks, that they already know. It's just access to that kind of self-knowledge is inhibited for some reason, and the psilocybin experiences allows folks to see truths that they already have present in them. And it's just not as accessible for whatever reason. A trip can go on for anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, like in that state. People may have mystical experiences, and they're characterized in many different ways. Although, from what I can tell, feelings of unity with, like they've let go of their ego. It's called ego dissolution in the psychedelic world, and folks feel a unity with the abiotic and biotic world around them, and it's so fulfilling as to be a mystical experience. But people have described mystical experiences many different ways, and it's very interesting when religious professionals and so on get involved because they use their own language of their particular faith to describe their experience. And then this is So that's all kind of good trip stuff. People also have bad trips. I know there's lots of folks that like to say there's no such thing as a bad trip. Um, there's only challenging trips. And I just, I'm calling bullshit on that because people really do have trips. You know, they do. And sometimes they have extended difficulties that can last quite a long time if they are unable to get any sort of support afterwards. But we can talk about bad trips later or another time. Uh, so then at the end of the trip, one of the things that happens for some, happened to me, is that if you have the aches and pains can disappear during the course of a trip. I remember now I have chronic neck pains. It's from, doing this all day, being a writer. And during trips, my neck pain goes away. And as I'm kind of how I know I'm coming back, I'm just sobering up is like, the neck pain is coming back. Um, and I also will get the shakes afterwards. They're a little bit like postpartum shakes. Um, I think it's an energy release from your body. It's like, ooh, but it's okay. It's not really scary. There's wonderful feelings of love and warm, cozy, yummy feelings that are not atypical. There's a lot of in a tripping room, you see a lot of people kind of blowing kisses at each other because they feel, so loving. But other people, cry the whole time. Um, and that's a different kind of trip, but it happens. It happens a lot more than is reported, unfortunately, which is why I think I gave it so much purchase in my book.
So, if you take that compared to other psychedelics, is there anything unique about mushrooms in your experience?
I haven't done any other psychedelics since I was a teenager. When I was young, there were no mushrooms around. It was the 70s. Everybody was taking LSD. I don't remember any of these kinds of experiences. I remember having these sort of mind-blowing nature awareness experiences, which are also happen with psilocybin, especially outdoors for me. But the um, insights and revelations, I know that people on LSD have experienced them. I've heard it reported widely, and I think there's quite a lot of parallel. Maybe LSD is more tiring. It's a longer lasting experience. Um, but and I don't know if the empathy piece that people sometimes feel with psilocybin, where they um, will feel and care deeply for folks in their lives, um, animals, the world around them. I don't know if that is so much a characteristic of LSD, but it may well be. I'm just not that knowledgeable.
And so you mentioned the ego dissolution, which I've heard before. Is there any research into why that happens? Like what's behind that?
Um, it seems to be an effect of the uh, inhibition of certain executive type functioning in the brain. Um, so the organizing, the way our brain, this, so I'm sort of reluctant to even get into this because it's not the science is sort of is speculative, and I don't really know exactly what anybody's talking about. It's really hard to pin down. But this notion that when you consume the psilocybin, it causes this inhibition of a large organizing aspect of the network in the brain called the default mode network, which I recently talked to a neurologist and he said, we're not in agreement it even exists. So that's it. Um, Inhibiting this sort of organizing network allows for a kind of chaos that releases all kinds of um, connections in the brain, including one's connection with one's own narrative, one's sense of oneself, one's ego. With that temporarily offline or inhibited, then experiences people have are what it's like to be in the world without me being in the center of everything. That seems to be the general, thinking on this.
Yeah, makes sense. Anybody have any questions around that? Denise, you look like you're tracking. Any thoughts? You look like you're following along intently. Any questions you have around that or anything else we've talked about? You want to ask Eugenia?
Dave, how did you know?
Oh, I can tell. I see this little thumbnail and I spend all day looking at thumbnails and trying to read minds.
Yeah, I did. I had a question about um um I know you mentioned, Eugenia, there might be I'm curious about like the biological response to psilocybin. So, one person might have a trip where they're crying for 4 hours, and one might have a mystical experience. And outside of intention and maybe setting or risk or the factors you've mentioned, is there some sort of biological or neurological thing happening with neurotransmitters in the brain that you know of? Like one person has more or less serotonin receptor, something of that nature.
You mean, are some people predisposed to bad trips? You're getting that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the clinical trials, the researchers will not accept anyone who has schizophrenia or a history of schizophrenia in their family, their immediate family. And there's very few who will there's a few studies where bipolarism, people with bipolar are actually being studied. One study, I think, maybe two. But in general, if you have bipolar, they don't want you in the study. And the reason why is because the psilocybin seems capable of triggering psychosis. So that's a biological, no bueno. Like you don't want to go there. Um, Otherwise, it's really kind of more of a state of mind, which is why I think for a long time, um, when people talked about magic mushrooms, they would say, oh, they're safe as milk. They do not cause any, it's not known that they cause any damage to your organs of any sort. Um, they they may with prolonged use, but that's not known yet at this point, but they may cause some vascular heart problems. But that research is really nascent, as is pretty much all psilocybin related research. The risk factor is really ultimately kind of emotional. So is that biological? I don't know. I think that there's plenty of depressed people I know who will say, yeah, it is. But I don't know.
It's kind of what you bring into it one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that can definitely be the case.
Thanks, Denise.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, now we're going to do a breakout. We're going to do a breakout. And what we're going to explore in the breakout is the topic of advocacy. And specifically what we're wanting to bore into is if you what you've heard in the past, either from a person or a publication around what the benefits, the potential benefits would be, or why you would want to use magic mushrooms to begin with. So what we want to do is break out and get folks talking about the way you've heard magic mushrooms characterized in terms of the promises of what they can do for you. So Ronnie is going to shoot us out to the breakout rooms. We're going to spend a couple of minutes there, and then we're going to come back and debrief. See you in a bit. Be back. I forgot to mention before we went to the breakout, although the main session is being recorded, the breakouts weren't. So nothing you said in the breakouts was recorded. So that's a good thing, I suppose. Yeah, so what I want to do now is I want to go around to the different groups and have people share what you spoke about. And I'd actually like to start with my own group, Group 5, Reka. If you could describe the advocacy that you got through the Alchemist Kitchen experience.
Oh yeah. So a couple years ago I was telling Dave that I got into mushrooms because I was also another sucker for the crazy sales of the whole wellness trend, and I got into mushroom tea and like lion's mane and reishi and stuff, and started incorporating a lot of that into my diet. And then I live in Brooklyn, New York. So I found this place called the Alchemist Kitchen. I think it's in Soho, Manhattan. And they were offering like a talk there on microdosing. And I went, and the gentleman who owns that shop, I forget his name, but he gave us like all a little sample of it. And it was really interesting. It was, and then I started microdosing, not for a very long time. But most of the is mostly just like for healing, more therapeutic benefits, not really recreational. So that's kind of been my experience with psilocybin. And then that kind of kickstarted me to read more Paul Stamets's work. I think he's really interesting. So yeah.
And then when you were there at the Alchemist Kitchen, and the person there, the owner, was describing the benefits, what did you hear in terms of advocacy? How was that characterized?
It was just it was an introduction as another alternative to traditional psychotherapy and pharmaceutical drugs, opioids and stuff like that. And it can get kind of political with like insurance and all those things. But I was telling Dave that it was still very much a sales event. So of microdosing chocolate mushrooms, but yeah, that's how it was presented.
Very good. Thank you, Reka.
Yeah, no
And
problem.
somebody from Group 4, could you share your experience, what you discussed in Group 4? If you even remember what group you were in. Yeah, Denise.
It might have been Ian and I.
Okay.
Ian, do you want to share?
Sure. Let's see. We discussed the therapeutic ways that we have experienced psilocybin, and I shared a little bit about how I kind of took an entire year to try to, just as an experiment, to see if I could rewire my brain from pessimist to optimist. And a gratitude journal, like 3 distinct psilocybin journeys with a focus on that, and just a mindfulness practice. Was able to like start putting in some new grooves. Because, and then microdosing LSD, I think, was also, we didn't really talk about that, but that was another thing that kind of helped point my overall thinking in a more positive direction. Yeah, so that was kind of a fun thing to chat about.
Very good. Denise, anything to add?
Yeah, I think at the end, Ian and I discussed how, they're in a therapeutic setting, sometimes with as much intention as you can set, sometimes the medicine or psilocybin shows you, what maybe you were trying not to feel or trying not to see. And so, there's, some confronting moments. But yeah, I think that's part of the therapeutic use.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Group 3. If somebody wants to come off mute from Group 3. And if you don't remember what group you're in, come off mute and start talking anyway. Yeah. Christine, what was discussed in your group?
Oh, I was in Group 1.
Okay. All right. Group 1, representing Group 1. Go ahead.
Well, the question made me think of, I had been traveling in Colorado and I got invited to a death cafe. And so there were a number of death doulas there who were, talking about how beneficial the use of psilocybin for the terminally ill had been in their practices, and then even expanding that to when family members around the terminally ill were struggling with the process, and afterwards kind of just using it to, which I think psilocybin does, kind of take the fear of death to a different, away, or just really kind of lessens it in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And that's
powerful.
some of the most persuasive uh, research, I think, is on psilocybin helping people with terminal diagnoses and helping them to cope with the isolation and the sort of why is this happening to me, and facing imminent death. It's like, it's really quite persuasive. I read a lot about it because I talked to a bunch of different nurses and doctors and some death doulas about it. The downside is like how close to death can you go safely? There's issues of consent. There's issues of when other drugs that people who are really at the end of their lives might be on. It's a little bit more complicated, and it's these nurses that I who talked with me and whose ideas I reported. They brought up a lot of things that would need to be addressed if this was going to go to the next level and be legalized. But of course, it's those practitioners who should be the ones that are asked for their advice.
Right.
They have a good idea of what kind of problems and benefits might arise.
I mean, I think there'll be a lot of resistance from the medical community just in general, but interactions. But I mean, from what I understand, psilocybin does not really like interact that much with most of these drugs, especially on a small level. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot is unknown about it. And that seems to
right.
be like the main problem. But
But
yeah,
you're dying anyway.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there would be exactly the kind of thing that would inhibit a regulator,
right.
So all of it has, I guess, to be taken into account. But the folks that are kind of experimenting with this right now and certainly have a lot to add, to the conversation at this point. Anyway, I found it really provocative and interesting. Gave it a lot of real estate in my book.
Thank you, Christine. Ryder or Dan, want to come off mute and share what you experienced in your group?
Sure. We initially just talked about how psilocybin pretty much has a use for everything in one form or fashion. Um, and then we ended our conversation talking a bit about some of the research studies that are being done incorporating psilocybin into academic research nowadays, and how the information that we're getting just really falls short because there are not strong research parameters to study psychedelics.
100%.
Yeah, so I actually, and this might be a little forward of me to say, but I said, I think we should take psychedelics and ask them how we should study them. And that's probably going to be,
Yeah.
I don't know how else to get the answer. So, but yeah, Eugenia, I'm curious if you, in your research, saw anything that was kind of like uplifting to you in academic research that's being done that does seem hopeful.
Well, the endless curiosity, and the willingness to after going through all of the sort of predictable hoops, trying to create clinical trials that mimic clinical trials for, I don't know, antacids, the creativity that people are employing. Sometimes that means limiting the goal of a drug. So right now, one of the things I didn't spend much time on this in the book. I talked more about what the general challenges were that were facing psychopharmaceutical companies in trying to get a psilocybin drug to market. But right now, I've been working with this woman, Joyce Sau, who used to be the clinical trials director for Compass Pathways, which is one of the bigger pharmaceutical companies. And we're breaking down the FDA regulatory system and showing how hard it is to fit a psychedelic drug into those steps. Because one of the things when I talked about this book, and a lot of people I met in the psychedelic world have been like, oh, the FDA suppresses psychedelic research. And our Secretary of Health has said as much. But I kind of think that's bullshit because the FDA is like created to bring certain kinds of drugs to market, not drugs that potentially heal by means of a mystical experience. It's just a whole other can of worms. And so it's very interesting to see how scientists are looking to solve those problems. For example, I know one researcher who's thinking that the most potential in terms of getting a drug to market sooner rather than later is to explore microdosing because there's no hallucinations or, there's no, you know, it's perceptive, there's no perceptive distortions, right? Which is a real problem because a hallucination is an adverse effect according to the FDA, which it would be if you're taking an antacid. There would really be a bummer if you took an antacid and you started to hallucinate. So that is one way, that some companies are saying, well, maybe if we can figure out if there's efficacy in this drug without any perceptive side effects, then that'll make it that much easier to move it through the pipeline. Alternatively, the FDA might have to change its way of operating to a degree to accommodate. But that's a structural problem that could take a lot of time. Not that people don't want to do it. I mean, that's not what I'm seeing. It's more like the task is huge.
Mhm.
Ron, you're
Can I ask
dying to
one
say
thing?
something. Oh, go ahead, Ryder. Sorry.
I have one more question, and this is jumping back a little bit, but when you mentioned the conversion of psilocybin to psilocin,
Hmm.
uh, I wondered if you came across and you probably did because of your culinary background as well, the lemon tech method.
Yeah.
Um, can you maybe just share a tiny bit about what you know about that for everybody? Because it was something that I found to be pretty niche, and it's actually my preferred way of taking psilocybin because my stomach is very sensitive and it
Yeah.
totally curbs all of the gastric upset.
Does. So a lemon tech, what that is by adding lemon juice to let's say your ground mushrooms, it speeds up the conversion of psilocybin to psilocin because when the psilocybin is in your gut, it encounters acids in your stomach and your liver and your kidney, and those acids shear off part of the psilocybin molecule, and the remaining fragment is psilocin, and psilocin is not necessarily going to upset your stomach. Psilocin just goes into your bloodstream. So if you do a lemon tech or this sort of expedited acidification, or what it's doing is it's removing the phosphate group off the molecule, so it's dephosphorylating the psilocybin molecule. Um, if you expedite that with acids and lemon juice, then the idea is the user will have less side effects, stomach side, less discomfort, GI discomfort, as Ryder has experienced. And that could very well be the case. I mean, it's obviously the case for some people. It's not. It's never been like tested by a research group, because it's like, it's just it's not the kind of thing that a pharmaceutical company or the NIH or something is going to get, say, well, maybe what should we be doing lemon tech instead with this illegal drug? It's just not going to happen right away. But anecdotally, yeah, a lot of people find it helpful. And it's an interesting, I write a little bit about, more than a little bit, about why psilocybin affects the tummy in the first place. And it could very well, so psilocybin there's various theories out there or hypotheses out there, but to me, the most persuasive one is comes out of the University of Utah, a mycologist named Bren Dentinger. And what Bren is saying is that the psilocybin evolved in not only psilocybin mushrooms, but in various mushrooms as an anti-feed, just tears apart slugs. So when the slugs try to eat the mushroom, the psilocybin causes all this gastric, GI problems for the slugs. And when we eat the mushroom, well, we have serotonin receptors in our tummies too. And it's like anything with a serotonin receptor in their tummies may very well have stomach GI as a result of eating these mushrooms. And here's an interesting little add-on, is that synthetic psilocybin also makes your stomach sore. So it's not like, it's only once the phosphate, once it's a different molecule and it's been, the psilocybin's been dephosphorylated, that people seem to avoid the worst of the stomach discomforts, which doesn't happen to everybody anyway. But nausea is definitely a side effect that a lot of people experience.
Yeah, it's a very interesting rabbit hole. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Spent a lot of time on it in the book, by the way, if you want to find out all the different ways people consume the mushroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Good, thanks.
Thanks for asking that, Ryder. Just added lemons to my shopping list for tomorrow. So
It's the
appreciate
weekend.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate that. That's because I definitely have experienced that myself. Ronnie, you've been busting at the seams. What do you got to say, man?
Oh, just the FDA conversation gets me fired up, It's just, not, yeah. The interesting headline of these companies want to create a version of psilocybin or LSD that doesn't have psychoactive effects. And to me, I'm like, the subjective experience is so meaningful. And so it feels like a square peg in a round hole situation.
Totally.
We're seeing this with ketamine assisted psychotherapy too. We have so many success stories of ketamine in an adjunct to a psychotherapeutic process is really helping people. Yet the FDA doesn't want to study ketamine assisted psychotherapy. They're the Food and Drug. They only want to study the ketamine. But the therapy
they don't have
is such
capacity for therapy. FDA doesn't cover therapy.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
we can't make the next step of
Yeah.
getting CAP
Psilocybin
approved for insurance.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect, So being in this world so much, I just really love the Buckminster Fuller quote where he says, it's like, rather than focusing on destroying something, create something that makes the old system obsolete. And I would love to see some creative approach to really demonstrate how efficacious these methods are with these compounds.
Ideas out there. When it comes to psilocybin, I mean, it, looking for solutions from the folks that know the most about this drug, which would be the indigenous people of Central America.
Bingo.
Those are the people who, it seems to me, would be the best folks to ask how to resolve this problem. I mean, it's not that they live outside of the modern world. I mean, they know what the pharmaceutical industry is about and what its challenges are and what its great gifts have been to those of us that, I don't know, have migraines or whatever. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if the solution that they might recommend would have to do more with community centers
Yeah.
that where people could come together in a community, where psilocybin centers serve people in the community, by people, nurse practitioners or whoever in the community, so that there was a consistency in terms of maybe income levels and the challenges, maybe uh, racial identity challenges that people face that occur, that come up during psychedelic trips, that are significant but don't have a real kind of feedback mechanism necessarily in place. And I think that would just be really the following the path of legalization. This pharmaceutical industry, that's trying to fit into our current kind of more capitalist system, where
Yeah.
we produce a product and it helps people, or it's successful because it helps people. But this one is tricky on a lot of
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's how, when I envision, the ancient future, whatever word you want to use for like this next phase we're going into, that's it. Looking to these community-based practices. Yeah.
I know. Hire them
Thanks for
for
saying
some, yeah. I know.
Consult.
I've always, it's like, yeah. I mean, and the thing is over and over again, people, leaders in those communities have said, we're willing to help. But you got to meet us halfway,
Yeah.
and stop the exploitation and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Ronnie. We can always count on you for passion in some direction. So thank you for that. We appreciate that about you. Eugenia,
Yeah.
we're coming up on time here. Anything else to close us out? Any parting thoughts that we haven't covered that are important for us to hear?
Well, I don't know if people are gonna love hearing this or not, but one thing that I have noticed, so I'm kind of like a consumer advocate in a way. What I try to do in my work, at least in this book, is give people tools to inform themselves and so on. So it's really service journalism, but I am pretty passionate about people advocating for themselves. And so I do spend a little time in my various talks explaining how they can do that and how they can spot red flags. And one of the things that I haven't noticed so much with this crowd, which is really refreshing because I see it a lot when people talk about the medicine or the sacrament, they're calling psilocybin a medicine or a sacrament. So in my writing, in this book, I don't I call psilocybin a drug, because medicine, if I said medicine, that would imply a use, that it's used for healing. And if I said sacrament, then it would apply a use for spiritual enhancement or purposes. If I said shrooms, it would imply a use that to my ears, like we're going to the club. Drug is the only word that I can use that is not laden with potential use. And it's my contract with the reader that I'm not going to be pushing them into thinking about this drug one way or the other. So I have to completely back off that kind of language. I mean, I quote people who say it, and it's in everyone's business to say whatever they want to say. But as a journalist, my agreement with the reader is that they don't get anything, they're not getting sold anything by me, except hopefully I'll sell a book. But beyond that, content wise, that's not what I'm doing here. And so I also recommend that when people talk with others about psilocybin, that they listen for that stuff, because it'll tell you a lot about where somebody's coming from and where they want you to go, which is okay. But if you know it, then you have more agency. And so throughout my work, I'm constantly taking that kind of approach, and this book is built on scientific papers and interviews with researchers, on large scale anecdotal surveys, and smaller anecdotal studies that I've gleaned, that I put together, that I either read or I put together, and I also really sourced them carefully, or that I put together based on like social media stuff. I mean, just reading a zillion social media trip tales and so on, and then my own personal experiences. So I tried really hard not to fall down that, well, I just wouldn't anyway, but I don't feel like there's a place in my writing to try to tell you what to do or be a guide or anything like that. I just seek to answer questions people might have. Um, I'd say it's Have a Good Trip is really more of a resource than anything else.
Yeah, and if you haven't already read it, I recommend that you do. It's amazing. And like I said, very much of a balanced view. Eugenia, what you just said right now just really brings that out. That comes out through the book. It's very much of a balanced view where you're presenting information and you're letting up to the reader to interpret it in a way that's most relevant to them.
Yeah. And my lawyers at Macmillan were very happy about that.
Oh
As you
yeah,
can imagine.
that
Oh
too.
my God. Yeah.
That too. I can imagine what those conversations were
They're
like.
like, woof.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It was a privilege to have you here. It was very informative, very engaging, and thank you very much for your wisdom. It was awesome having you here. Thank you, everybody else, for being on the session tonight too. Laura, you want to close us out here?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dave. And thank you so much, Eugenia, for being here. And just want to give you can all hear me, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to give a shout out to the Thank You Life staff who's here supporting this call and, making the whole thing work, to be honest. Meredith Thomas, maybe you can wave. She's our director of philanthropy, amazing person who's the one ahead of raising the funds to make this happen, that we can help people. And Ronnie, thank you for all your work with the tech and the magic of marketing and beautiful invitations. And Denise and Ryder, thank you so much for all you do in the background. It's beyond me, but I know it's critical to getting people help. Thank you. And yeah, some of our board members seem to have left, but I just want to really acknowledge that it takes a whole network, a mycelium network, to expand access to these medicines, if I do say so myself, to these wonderful healing drugs, and it takes all of us. So thank you for all of you being part of this incredible network of support that sustains life, and thank you for being here tonight. And we'll see you next time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Stay in the
Have a good night.
circle.
Thanks all.
Stay with the
Bye,
family.
everyone. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye.